And welcome back, Camperonis, to another episode of Magnum OPUS. I hope you're not getting tired of this because we are just getting started. Today, I want to talk to you about somebody that even I knew very, very little about. In fact, I would be lying if I said I knew anything about this until I talked to the wonderful Mara Gallagher at this summer's 2020 OPUS Camp. We are going to talk about the lovely violinist Maud Powell. You spell her name M-A-U-D, Maud, and last name Powell, P-O-W-E-L-L. Now, who is Maud Powell? If you've heard of her, a phenomenal congratulations to you and a crisp high five, because not a lot of people have. She is perhaps one of the most talented virtuosos of her time, and yet one of the least well known. So who was she? Maud Powell was born in Peru, Illinois. It's a tiny, tiny little city far south of here, but it is in Illinois. And she was really the first American violinist to achieve international rank. She was born in 1867. So a little bit of history for you. The Civil War had ended 2 years prior, 1861 to 1865. She was born to two non-musicians. So really they're not sure where the talent came from. However, if the name Powell rings a bell, her uncle, Wesley Powell, not only was a Civil War hero, but he was the famed explorer of the Grand Canyon. It's okay, so a little bit of fame runs in her blood. At the age of 7, she began violin and piano lessons in Aurora, Illinois. So fun fact about Aurora, if you've ever gone to our OPUS camp that was hosted at North Central College, which is our Naperville campus, Aurora is 15 minutes away. So she's quite local. She was recognized as a prodigy at the age of 9, and she was taken to Chicago to continue piano and violin study for the next 4 years. Now get this, when she was 13, her parents sold their home so they could raise funds to continue her music education. Remember when we talked about Beethoven 2 weeks back? He was considered a prodigy, but not to the extent of maybe Mozart, where his main living would be just performing for people across the country. Maud Powell, she was so good and such a virtuoso at that time, her parents sold their home, they stopped their careers to continue her future education when she was 13. Imagine that. Whoever's older than 13, sorry you missed your shot, she's done and doing this by now. After that, her mother and brother all traveled to Europe, and there she studied under Henry Schreidiak. And if anybody recognizes the name Schreidiak, he has very, very famous books about etudes and warm-ups. He's got a couple different volumes out for violin and viola, and they've probably been transcribed for cello and bass, but don't quote me on that. And she studied at the Leipzig Conservatory. Fun fact about the Leipzig Conservatory, it was founded by Felix Mendelssohn in 1843, and it's the oldest university school of music in Germany. Okay, but how good was this girl for real? Well, in 1885, she played Bruck's G minor concerto with the Berlin Philharmonic. Let's do a little bit of math. She was born in 1867. 1885 is her debut playing a concerto with a major symphony orchestra. So she's 18. She then returned to the United States and played the same piece with the New York Philharmonic. So now she's becoming pretty famous. She's played 2 major concertos under 2 different major conductors working with 2 big Philharmonic orchestras. And people start to take notice of her. She begins to premiere violin concertos by Tchaikovsky and Sibelius in the United States. And if you don't know Tchaikovsky or Sibelius, big shame on you. You should at least know Tchaikovsky. He did the Nutcracker. Big December Christmas piece. Plays all the time. She also performed Dvorak's Violin Concerto in 1894. So now she's in her 20s. So we just expect that she's a success by now because she's in her 20s. She was a very powerful advocate for music by Americans, specifically women and black composers. She even commissioned the British composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor a specific her own violin concerto. In 1894, she was honorably initiated into the musical women's fraternity Alpha Chi Omega, and unfortunately in 1919, she collapsed on stage due to a heart attack. A few months later, in January of 1920, she died after another heart attack in Pennsylvania while she was on tour. So why do we talk about her? And first of all, why am I talking about her? We talked about Beethoven because it was his 250th birthday, the year 250 years after Beethoven was born. Powell, if you were listening, she died in 1920, 100 years ago. But why are we celebrating her death? Why are we not celebrating, it's 100 years from her life? Well, unfortunately, she was fairly under the radar for quite a while. And we've only started to... She had a biography written about her in 1968 by Karen A. Schaefer, if you're familiar who the author is. And ever since the biography, her amazing musical exploits started to come to life again. And we started to take a look and realize, wow, she was really this incredible violinist. Back when she was alive in the 1800s, if you were not a composer, there were very few ways to get your name written down. Composers would compose works and pieces, and they would have their name inscribed on the page, right? So everyone would know who wrote the piece. If you were a performer, and this was before most forms of audio and zero video recordings, nobody knows who's playing if you don't identify it, and even if they could get their hands on a recording device. So very few people knew of Maud Powell, save the people that she played for, especially the Berlin Philharmonic and the New York Philharmonic. Now, she does have a few recordings of her playing, but keep in mind, we're talking early gramophones from 100 years ago, so the ability to do so was not as widespread as now. So she would be recording major works with a couple of other artists, or solo pieces at the time. So she does have a couple recordings if you want to look them out on YouTube. But we are celebrating 100 years after her death because why not? It's too long to wait for 150 years of her birth, and we like to celebrate her. She's amazing. In case you had any doubts in your mind that she was amazing, in 2014 she was posthumously granted, which means post-death, the Grammy Award. And the Grammy Awards are the biggest out of the top 3 music awards, the American Music Awards, AMAs, and the Billboard Music Awards. And the award was actually accepted on behalf of Powell by Karen A. Schaefer, who wrote a biography, and the famous violinist Rachel Barton Pine. And if you don't know who that is, come on, shame on you. Now, as always, I'm going to leave you today with a practice technique tip. Today's tip comes from the popular YouTube duo Two Set Violin. If you don't know who they are, I mean, come on at this point, people. They offer hilarious and very educational videos on YouTube for all sorts of string technique practice. Now, if you remember from 2 weeks ago, we've talked a little bit about what's called dedicated practicing. Tom Hooten talks a lot about it, as I mentioned in our Beethoven podcast. Dedicated practicing is not only sitting down and knowing where you're going to practice, but knowing how you are going to practice. Now, what is two-set violin's number one practice technique? Find a good practice environment. Better yet, create one. This is twofold. They say you got to rid yourself of all distractions. Okay, that's easy. I'll just turn the TV off. They say you got to find a place where you feel comfortable making mistakes. Okay, it's easy. I'll just go to my room. Except the TV is not the only distraction. It is so easy to just flip through Facebook, watch a little Instagram live feed really quick, or go on TikTok. Oh no, we can't do that if we want to have deliberate practice. What about that in practice environment? If you go to the same room each time where you only practice to submit assignments, or you only practice when you don't want to, you associate that room with doing something you don't want. So they say you have to find an environment where you enjoy practicing, where you sound good, or as good as you can in where you are. This gives you the ability to love practicing because you're there because you want to. All right, Camperonis, we are fresh out of time for the week. I hope you had a lot of fun. I hope you learned something new. I hope you go check out Maud Powell and go check out Two-Step Violin. In the meantime, I hope that it snows a little bit, and I will see you guys next week for our next episode of Magnum OPUS.